SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
All right, you're watching SABC News. We are bringing you live visuals. This is the arrival of the president of Indonesia, yeah?
So that is the president's plane. The doors have now been opened. I mean, it landed a few minutes ago. Prabowo Subianto with his delegation. Interestingly, Tulas, I was saying to our viewers, of course, Indonesia held the G20 presidency in 2022. Yep. And South Africa is the fourth in the global south, essentially, to host that, G20. So it becomes pivotal to see how the issues, that have been affecting those four countries have really come together in terms of each country carrying that message, particularly the message of development.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, South Africa has identified a number of issues, and all of those issues have really been centered around its key theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. Unathi, also last month, the president did lead a delegation and was on a visit of 3 countries in the Southeast Asian region.
Yes.
And Indonesia was one of those countries where, he made a stop along with his delegation. This was part of the work that was going into preparing for the G20 Leaders Summit to ensure that there's alignment on some of these issues, because at this point it's about ironing out whatever may be outstanding from the work that has been done by the various delegations, the Sherpa track, the work of the over 130 meetings that took place, focusing on various streams over the presidency of South Africa. But you're right to point out about the continuity of the presidencies of the G20 being in the global south, centering issues of sustainable development, issues of dealing with inequality. I saw that theme in particular, inequality, flowing through at least from India to Brazil to South Africa.
Absolutely. And in a moment, we are going to be joined by our guest, Dr. Frank Lekaba, who is a senior lecturer at the Wits School of Governance. We are looking at anti-corruption. And to us, what's important about this is that anti-corruption actually formed part of a working group. And I mean, there were key issues under that working group that were discussed. And those are some of the things that we need to touch base on. But let's see if we can stay with these visuals as the delegation from Indonesia makes its way out. It's not clear yet who is meeting the president and his delegation at this point, because we've been seeing various cabinet members meeting some of those. I saw earlier on with India, for instance. You were on screen with our viewers there as the minister in the presidency, Kumbuzo Nchaveni, was there to meet the minister.
Yeah, it's always all hands on deck with all the delegations arriving. Ideally, as far as the protocol goes, ideally you want the head of state to be receiving a head of state. Absolutely. But that's just impractical when you have a situation like this.
Especially yesterday, when you consider that there were certain events that the president was busy with. But let's welcome our guest now in studio, Dr. Frank Lekaba. A very good afternoon to you, sir, and thank you so much for your time. I want to start, in fact, as we look at those visuals for our viewers, with some of the key priorities for the anti-corruption working group. I mean, it had 4 key priorities, and I want to start with the first one, and I think it links in very well with the country's theme of solidarity, equality, sustainability, and that's the promoting of transparency, integrity, and accountability in the public sector. I mean, what we're currently seeing in South Africa domestically is all of these commissions playing out. Yeah. And the thread and the theme there is holding those that are in power to account.
No, that's correct, Unathi. The public sector, we see it as a facilitator of corruption. I think the G20, with the focus, they have been narrowed in their approach towards looking at corruption, global corruption, considering that G20 is a global institution. But public sector is very important and is very central in terms of the money that is supposed to be channeled towards service delivery is now being diverted towards people's pockets and all of that, diverted from the social agenda, from the national agenda of the country. And as a result, that does not only undermine the national agenda, but it also undermines the global agenda, such as Sustainable Development Goals, where the money that's supposed to go to health, that's supposed to go to education, is being diverted into people's pockets. And then as a result, you get shocked as to why the Sustainable Development Goals are not met. We remember the Millennium Development Goals were not met, and we said, okay, let's set the new agenda, let's expand the indicators and all of that. We can do all of that, but if the public sector is continuously enables corruption, then we have a problem, because we won't be able to meet those goals.
And I mean, that's a key one, I think, Tulas.
Yeah, it really is. Dr. Lekaba, what can the G20 do in the shape and format that it works in influencing policies in the countries that make up the G20 to deal with issues of corruption in the public but also in the private sector?
Yeah, so, Tulas, look, we can discuss policy, but I think the discussion of policy has to go hand in hand with the discussion of institutional architecture. What institutional architecture are we setting up globally that is going to be able to reverse this tide of corruption that is taking place at the national level? Of course, at the national level, it's easy to do. You would have, in our case, we have got institutions such as Public Protector, Auditor General giving all of that. And of course, we know there are limitations as well, particularly the Auditor General, as far as the performance of municipalities, the monies that are being diverted, and all the reports that are coming from the local government. But the issue I want to stress, Tulas, is as we discuss policy, because we tend to discuss policy, we should also discuss institutional architecture. Why is this important, Tulas, the institutional architecture? The Mbeki report on illicit outflows gave us a picture of how much is being diverted, the money that is being siphoned from the continent.
The illicit financial flows.
Exactly. So that money that is being siphoned is the money that undermines the state of development in the continent. And look at the victims of that siphoning of that money that is being siphoned. DRC being one of those kinds of countries. So if you don't have institutional architecture, either at the level of the AU, SADC, or even at the UN, you can have a policy, then the implementation will be very problematic. But it's very important also. I'm just saying, let's broaden the discussion to, as we talk policy, let's also think of the institutional architecture.
Sure.
And I mean, I think that goes in very well with the second priority, for this particular working group, and that is asset recovery measures. I mean, how important is it that these countries, particularly going into the Leaders Summit, have a concrete declaration that talks about how, as countries, we will work together to ensure that this becomes a success in terms of increasing efficiency in asset recovery? I mean, we are still talking about the Guptas to this day in South Africa. You see different countries, as you mentioned now, you mentioned certain countries in the African continent where it's very difficult to recover some of those assets. I mean, what needs to happen here, do you think, in terms of just reinforcement and working together from the various nations?
Yeah, so here what we have is a problem of the bilateral engagements between member states. We remember South Africa had to apply for extradition for the Guptas. Taking your example, Unati, we have to apply for extradition. But it's a legal process, it's a long-term process. And I will go back to my suggestion. That process is very long, the legal process is very long. To circumvent that process, let's have an institutional mechanism at the level of the United Nations. So these member states that are coming in here, majority of them are sitting in the Security Council. They are permanent members. They've got greater influence on that front in as far as promulgation of policies at the level of the United Nations. So when you go to the UN General Assembly discussion next year, corruption, these kinds of institutional architecture, let it be a topic that is being discussed to say, when extradition is not enough, because it has got legal challenges. Some countries don't have such kinds of judicial institutions that are very strong to help us in that context. But when you have global institutions aimed and targeted at these kinds of scores, it helps. And it helps because capital has become financialized, and it has become kind of generalized, and the control as it is now has become much more complicated. For example, the story of Josta. He gets prosecuted in Europe, and there are issues followed around there, but there's also issues of corruption here that they need to come and answer for here in South Africa. So when you have a global institution targeting that, then you are able to not only address it in South Africa, but also your response is also being implemented in another country.
Yeah. So as we talk to Dr. Frank Lekaba, what you're seeing on your screen are visuals coming through after the arrival of the President of Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto. The weather has changed quite significantly, Unati, from sunny late spring South African day to a bit of rain about, as those two flags of Indonesia and South Africa are flapping around in the winds there. In a way, it actually evokes that whole image that they talk about in bilateral relations.
Yeah.
You want a quote-unquote all-weather friend, don't you?
Yeah. And Thulas, I mean, we were busy talking, of course, to Dr. Lekaba.
Yeah.
So we're not sure at this stage if the president is still to disembark, but we definitely know that there is a delegation from Indonesia that has just arrived. So we'll make sure that we confirm that with our teams on the ground as soon as possible, as we continue, of course, to have this conversation and discussion.
Dr. Lekaba, just another theme, I guess, that flows from the conversation around strengthening anti-corruption mechanisms at a global level, certainly within the G20 and within their sphere of influence. The other conversation South Africa has fused in has to do with leveraging our critical minerals as well as rare earth minerals. This is a whole new conversation, isn't it? How does Africa in particular weigh in on that conversation and ensure that within that issues of governance are addressed, because we have the learnings from the minerals that we've mined up until now? What can happen when governance is not strong, such that we're not able to then leverage these minerals for our own development?
Yeah, no, Thulas, look, it's a very complicated thing, but I think the discussion in the continent should be the issue of beneficiation. How do we beneficiate from, because beneficiation means it will compel the consumers and the ones that process this to be finished product, will compel them to build skills capacity at the national level. So DRC would not just make their resources available, or South Africa will not just make South African resources available, but for extraction. But when we talk about beneficiation, we then mean let there be some relative process of processing the product. Although they may not be finished product at this level, but let's clean them. Let it not just be extracted and then it's out of our ports. But let's have a relative skill of saying, okay, develop the skill here at home so that we are able to play a role there. We are not just playing a role at the level of taxation, where the state just says, okay, we'll tax and all of that, but there's literally extraction.
So it's industrialization and value creation. It is
Thulas, but you have to be realistic. At what level of the value chain are you as a continent? So you cannot talk about processing when you still have got challenges of electricity, water, and all of that. You then put demands that please come and process here at home. So you can talk of issues of, okay, at what level of the entire value chain of this product as it gets extracted until it becomes a finished product in the form of a cell phone we have and all of that. Where are we? What kind of contribution can we play as a continent? I think that's one of the things that the AU, now that it's part of the G20 and it will be here and there will be sidelines of the AU and South Africa, I think that's one of the issues that the AU and South Africa will have to really discuss in terms of beneficiation.
I want to just, turn this conversation around a little bit, because when we start talking about anti-corruption, at the heart of the successes that we are seeing are whistleblowers, something that South Africans know only too well. But what is happening is that they're not getting the level of protection that they should get. And this is something that is not only a South African problem, but we are seeing it globally. What are some of the mechanisms that really here countries need to start enhancing and taking seriously in as far as whistleblowing is concerned? I mean, we had conversations even with the Justice Minister saying that there's no law that really talks about, protection of a whistleblower.
No, I think there are many issues to it, but let me first maybe say, let's take a lesson from Brazil. What the discussion was mainly on the law enforcement agencies, the integrity of law enforcement agencies. And I think as we talk about it here, I've been following the working group on anti-corruption. They are following on the very same discussion from Brazil. How do you strengthen and how do you build legitimacy for law enforcement agencies so that when a whistleblower blows the whistle, is protected not only in terms of the policy, but trust the law enforcement agencies that they can be trusted. They can expose themselves to extent where they know from after you blow the whistle, law enforcement protection will be on your side. Of course, there's been much talk about framework of whistleblowing and all of that, and the benefits that a whistleblower should enjoy. I remember I was listening to one show, and people were saying, let there be compensation for whistleblowers. And it was a kind of a discussion that took a different turn. But the key issue here, I think it's about, as we talk protection, are the law enforcement agencies credible? Can they enforce that? Can the whistleblower protect the law, respect, in fact, trust the law enforcement agencies that he or he will be protected if they blow the whistle? Or they will just say, okay, no, it's fine, I will just turn a blind eye to this.
Can these conversations, Doc, be separated from conversations around disciplining financial markets, for example, as far as corruption and, malfeasance happens outside of the private sector? The practices that in the past landed the global economy, in a spot of bother, that wanton disregard for regulation, reckless trading and the likes. Can the conversation around anti-corruption be separated from strengthening regulation where regulation is needed without stifling industry and markets?
No, Tulas, unfortunately you can't, because corruption happens at the national level, has got its domestic enablers. But the greatest beneficiaries of it, you'll find it's international actors. And because, like I said earlier on, capital has become much more generalized. So a company that is conducting business here at home and is linked to the illicit ways of doing business here at home will benefit greatly from getting the minerals from everything if it is done illegitimately or is done in a way that circumvents the normal process. So we cannot separate these issues from the international actors. And that's why I'm going back to the point. We need to then think of institutional architecture that will then be continental, that will then be global, as to then how do we police this corruption. But greatly, Tulas, the failure of the state benefits corruption a lot. Because the failure of the state means the collapse of institutions. Sometimes it's not only the collapse of institutions, but it's the absence of institutions. If you go to a country like Madagascar, you'll be shocked that there are certain institutions that are not there. That as a South African, you will say, how is this country managing without these kinds of institutions? You go to Botswana, Lesotho, for example, it's only now, a few years ago, where they were talking about establishment of the Human Rights Commission. You wonder then, how is it that this discussion arrives at this country so late? But there are so many of our countries here in the continent and in the global south where the state is illegitimate in terms of its hegemony. It's not so much hegemonic. You know, there are certain communities where people will say, I don't know the police, we can report these issues, but police are not, even here at home, there are villages where they say, we can report issues, but we don't have access to the police and all of that, or police come after 2 days. So this is what I mean by state hegemony and all of that. So unless institutions are there within the state and they've got a greater reach into our societies, then we can talk about whistleblowing, we can talk about the tightening up systems in a manner that then we don't have these kinds of the interface between the national and international actors undermining our economic growth.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Frank Lekaba, for that, of course, a senior lecturer in the Wits School of Governance. Of course, we are going to give you a quick break, but before we do that, in fact, let's show you visuals of Waterkloof Airport. That's where, of course, we will be receiving more heads of state to us in the coming days, of course, leading up to tomorrow. In fact, in a few hours' time. But look at those clouds.
So it all looks quite gloomy, the skies above Air Force Base Waterkloof, as we continue to watch the arrivals there, Unati. But I do hope that, it won't affect the pace and rhythm of arrivals of the heads of state and government.